welcome back to Bill's Retro Stuff. Today we're going to look at the power supply of this Tandy 3100. We're going to also test the hard drive to make sure at least it spins up, because it has probably been sitting for a while. So I think first thing we'll do, we'll check the hard drive, and we're going to check the Western Digital hard drive right here to make sure that it does spin. A little spoiler though, I've already fixed the power supply, but I'll run through what I did to the power supply and what I checked. And we'll even do some checking of some other stuff on it too, to make sure that it's going to work properly. So what I'm going to do to test this hard drive is I am going to go ahead and I'm going to pull an ATX power supply, which I happen to have right here. And these are the new power supply. This is a new one. Well, new old. I've had it for a while. And so what we need to do on this is I need to jumper, flipping it around to the connector. I need the jumper, the green wire with either the black wire. Let me zoom in here just a little bit. I need to jumper there's a green wire with two blacks on each side, so we can either jumper to either one, because basically it just sends the signal to ground. So what we'll do is I'm going to jumper the green wire right here to this black wire on the right side of it. And so what I had done is I took an old resistor and I made me a jumper. They're great for, you know, if you want to test your power supply outside the thing, so outside the computer. So we're going to find the green one, which is this one right here, and we'll go ahead and run our jumper, and we're going to put it in just like that. So now let's go ahead and plug our power supply in here, and we will see if it comes on. So if we look here, the fan should spin up, hopefully. So let's go ahead and turn that on, and see the fan spins up. So we'll go ahead and we're going to shut that off, and we're going to plug power plug here into the hard drive. Now it doesn't necessarily mean the hard drive works, but at least we know it spins up. So let's go ahead and put that in, and let's see if the hard drive spins up, shall we? Let's see. Let me zoom that out just a little bit. Oh, that's the wrong way. There we go. And let's see if that zooms out. Let's see if that spins up. Well, that's a little bit of good news. You hear that hard drive spin up. You hear the heads resetting. And so now we've at least proved that the hard drive does spin up, which is a good sign. Let's go ahead and look at our other power supply. So let's go ahead and shut this off. You don't want to move it while it's spinning if you can help it. So we're going to slide this over to here, and we'll go ahead and get rid of this ATX power supply off the table here. And let's put the other power supply up that I cleaned up and repaired, or hopefully got it repaired. We're going to check it here in a bit. So this power supply, it's funny, I always tell you that I always go down and check all the capacitors, which I did. So I replaced every capacitor in here. Capacitors, the ones in here, this little bitty bin right here, and I even replaced the two big ones. They weren't bad, but they were on the lower side, so I put capacitors on the higher side. And this little capacitor here, which was not making this power supply work properly, and it's a 35 volt 22 microfarad. I put a 50 volt 22 in there. This power supply, the reason I went ahead and fixed it, or did it before, so I didn't do it on video, was because this power supply here was doing something real funny. It had voltage, and you could power up the CD-ROM, but if you try to power up the hard drive, which took a lot more power, it'd just kick out. The hard drive wouldn't spin up, the fan would kick off, and the power supply would just kick out. So I wasn't quite sure where to look for that at. You know, it's I was sure in my mind it was a capacitor issue, but after checking the big ones, which they weren't bad, but I replaced them with new ones, and same with those right there, I said, well, okay, they didn't really check too bad, nothing that should make the power supply quit working. Replaced a small one here, didn't change anything. I'm sorry about that. Replaced a small one in there, didn't change anything. I said, okay, well, there's one more in the switching part of it. These are the FETs right here. These are the diodes. So I pulled it out, and sure enough, this one here, and we'll get my little meter out here. This is a capacitance meter. You can buy them online pretty cheap anymore. This one here is a B&K. I've had this one for quite a number of years. So let's go up here to 20 microfarads, and actually go to 222. And if you test this one, we'll put it on the negative lead, on the negative, whoop, and we'll put the positive on the positive, and it checks. And let me see if we can see it here. Let me zoom in here. It should check if I see about, well, I gotta get it out of my light. Either way it goes, I got light. Let's tilt it up here. There we go. 5.8 microfarads, which really is quite low. I think these are 10 or 20%. So anyway, make a long story short, there you go. 5.8 microfarads, bad capacitor. So, but we still can do some checking after we fixed it. I cleaned it all up, put it together. So let's do some checking here a little bit, and we can pretty well check what the actual voltages coming out are. But the problem with these type of power supplies, and any of them really, you really need to have a load on them. So we will plug the hard drive in. I don't think you can see that on the camera, I don't think. Let me check and see. Not as good as you should be able to see it. Alright, so let me lay that down here on some, there we go, we'll use a solder roll. There, you can read that a little better. Now let me zoom on out here. And let's see, you can still see, that's good. Alright, there we go. Now, what we're going to do now, we're going to go ahead and put, we know the hard drive spins up, and we're going to go ahead and put the power onto the hard drive here. There you go. Alright, and we'll go ahead and slide the power supply back a little bit. We'll put the hard drive right next to it. And we'll check these pins here. And we'll see what they're. So let's go ahead. Let's check and see if it does power up. I'll shut the power off over on the switch box. Let's go ahead and plug the thing in. Yeah. Okay, and then we'll push the power switch. I've got the power switch right here. And the fan spins up. Hard drive spins up. Before it wouldn't even do that. Before it was just wouldn't do that. So what we want to check is the voltage. And roughly this voltages on this circuit should be fairly simple. I've pulled up some paperwork on it. And let's see what we have as far as voltages go. So we'll look at the reds and the red wires. These are the reds. We'll look at the one going to the motherboard. So the reds, if you look at this, the reds, and we'll slide the power supply up, and we'll slide this back up just a little bit more. And we'll slide the hard drive over so we can see. So we'll have to test this. But you'll see that you have two blacks, a yellow, and a reds, or three reds. Three reds are 5 volt positive. The yellow is 5 volt negative, and blacks are ground. So let's go ahead and let's check. And what I'll do is I'll run that in here. So we'll put our probe in there. And let's check and see what we have on the meter here. See, that's AC range. Let's go to DC range. And let's see what we got. Let me straighten up my wires here just a little bit so I ain't fighting them so much. Okay, so now if this 5 volts good, then you know the 5 volts, so put our ground in. Run our voltmeter to that. Okay, and we got 5.21, which is good. According to that, it should be between 4.75 and 5.25. So we're on the high side on that one. So we know the 5 volts. So let's look at the negative 5 volts. It should be a negative 4.75 to negative 5.25. And we are at negative 5.02. So that's good. So that works. Now let's go over to connector number 1. And connector number 1 is basically the 12 volt lines. So you have common, which is the 2 blacks, then you've got the blue one, which is the negative 12 volts, should be negative 9 to negative 15 volts. Then you've got the orange one. Well, one of these is orange. One should be yellow. The yellow should be a yellow should be a 12 volt positive, so it should run between 9 volts to positive 15 volts. And the orange one could be 5 volts positive or 0. It all depends on what power supply. So let's find out what we got here. So put our voltmeter in there, put it in the ground. Now let's put our thing in blue. Okay, we got 11.72 volts. I would wish it was on the higher side, but you know, wish it was like 12 or 13 volts, but it's still above the 9 volts minimum. So that's your negative side. You got a negative point. Okay, and let's go to the positive side. Now it's 11.64. You know, it's still above the 9 volts positive, so that's working good. And then let's see what the other one is. This one here should be, yeah, this is 5 volts. Or 0. Some have 0, but it's 5 volts. So there you go. That's running about 5.21, which is pretty good. So it looks like all of our power is there. Now we're going to shut everything off. Now there's another test that we're going to test here on the same thing, and we're, again, this is not representative of every power supply, but this particular power supply here is we're going to go back and check the ohmage. According to the papers I have here, the yellow and the red, which are the 5 volts, 5 volts yellow is negative, 5 volt positive is the red, it should read greater than 100 ohms. So if it doesn't read greater than 100 ohms, then we still have another problem. So let's go take a gander here real quick. Let's put that in there. What we got? Oh, I got to go to ohms. Let's go to ohms. There we go. Let's see what we got. Now, according to this, we've got 897 k ohms. So I guess that is greater than 100 ohms. So let's go over here. So it's greater than 100. It's 1 point. The capacitor's charging up, so it's still above 100 ohms. So it's like 2 point something k ohms, 1,000 ohms. So according to that, that should be good. So let's go over to our negative blue, or negative 12, and according to that, it should be greater than 200 ohms, and it is. It's around for 266 ohms. So that means that must test good. Let's go over to this one, and this should test above 250 ohms. Sorry about that. Now that one there is running a little low. Now why, I have no clue. And that is our positive 12 volts. And it's, according to that, it should be over 200 ohms, but it is not. Something we may have to look at. But we're still going to run the power supply and see what it does first anyway. And then the blue should be, it's well over 100 ohms. So that's good. A little concern on the 12 volter. But we'll take a gander here. We'll go over here to let's go over to the power supplies here. So you should have red. One should be 12. So let's go ahead And let's put a pin in here. Let's check this one here. 55 ohms. We'll have to look and see if that becomes a problem or not. And it may, because it's not over 250 ohms. So we may still have a little bit of a problem with this power supply. And the 5 volts good as well over that. So we're still going to run the power supply, even with that 55 ohms. Even though I would like to have it over 200 ohms. Yeah, we'll see. Like I said, what I did in here is I replaced the capacitors. A little capacitor in here, a little capacitor there, a little capacitor there. Replace these two line-in capacitors. What I did is I've already checked the voltages. I knew the voltages were close. The 12 volts still there, but it's on the low side. We'll run it, and if it gives us a problem, then we'll take the power supply back apart and we'll see. We'll do a little bit more pinpointing. You know, some of this paperwork I got is just somebody's, you know, what they've checked and what they've run with. I've checked all the capacitors. Sometimes when you get a weird thing like that, sometimes these capacitors here could be wrong, or could be bad. I checked all the AC. These are all AC capacitors. They all check good. No problem with those. Other than that, most of the time with all this stuff, it has to do with capacitors, and like I said, we replaced all the capacitors. So now I think we need to put the cover back on. I think we need to see if the power supplies work. So or if the computer works. So let's go ahead and put the cover on, and then we'll end this video and we'll start on our next one about putting everything back together. So let's go ahead and slide the case in. Not happy. Not happy. Good one. There we go. Not happy. There we go. There we go. Now let's pull this forward and pull this back. No. There we go. Things sometimes are more pain in the butt to get back together than they are apart. There we go. These have to go. I messed up here. This has to go. It was not an easy get apart. It really wasn't. So let's get a screwdriver in here. Come on, get up in here. This power supply was a pain in the butt to tear apart. It really was, because you've got to deal with all the grommets and everything. And what I got to do is I got to get, there we go, I got to get that, has to go inside of this here. Oh, come on then. There we go. This side is already in there, so let's go ahead and tuck that back down again. There we go. Come on. Sometimes I just want to be a pain. In this case here is kind of hard built. It's not like a lot of the newer power supplies that you know, that are kind of not necessarily flimsy, but so we'll go ahead down. We'll go ahead and put our screws back in, and we'll give it a test. Like I told in one of my, or in the other video, that I've always been kind of adventurous anyway, so this stuff, tearing this stuff apart doesn't bother me. So it doesn't bother me a bit to tear it apart and see if we can figure it out. What, you know, rather than getting yourself a little bit shocked, because you got to remember there's high voltage in there. So always when you mess with this stuff, always watch to make sure about the high voltage. But it looks like the power supply is ready to go back in. Another thing about capacitors a lot of people don't realize, like this one right here, and if you zoom in on the capacitor itself, my fudgy little fingers there. Get over here. There we go. If you look at it, it's a 35 volt 22 microfarads. You could put a heavier one in there. I put a 50 volt 150 microfarads in it, and I always like to go a little higher in the voltage, a little safety in there, because a lot of the cheap electronics, and not even cheap, but they get cheap on electronics. Sometimes they put, like, if the circuit is running at 10 volts, so put a 16 volt capacitor in there, and it ain't gonna hurt to bump up the voltage. Don't change the microfarad part of it, because that you know, that has to be, that's part of the deal, part of the you know, that they've already calculated everything it needs to be in there, so the microfarad has to be correct. But you can run the voltage up a little bit. That'll give you a little bit extra cushion in case you get something weird going on, or like a voltage spike or something like that. But other than that, you know, yeah, always you can put the same size in, but always put a little bigger in, you know, just a little safety precaution. So, well, on our next video we'll start putting all this back together. I hope to see you then. Thank you.